Hello everybody, and welcome to the Chess Musketeer, as today I have a guide on the Hillbilly Gambit, which is a very fun and low theory option against the Caro Kann Defense. We start off with pawn to e4, and black replies with pawn to c6. Now we play bishop to c4, the Hillbilly attack. Black replies with d5. And here, instead of capturing with the e-pawn on d5, we drop our bishop back to b3. Now, black either can take the pawn or defend. First, we will go over the accepted variation, and once they take, we will reply with queen to h5. Here, black has really two good options to defend. They can either go pawn to g6 or pawn to e6. First, I'll go over pawn to e6, and here, after they play pawn to e6, we'll go knight to c3, developing our knight while hitting the pawn. They'll most likely go knight to f6, hitting our queen while defending the pawn, so we'll drop our queen back to h4, hitting the pawn in the process. They don't have any way to defend this pawn. If they try to, with queen to d4, we now have a very nice knight to f3, and they can't take because then they lose the queen, and if the queen tries to stay on the same file, that doesn't work because after a3, the queen's eventually forced off of the file, and we can now capture the pawn for complete free. So back here, if they instead play like bishop to e7, we can now just capture the pawn, and if they take the knight back, this is just a very easy and simple position. We'll push pawn to d4, we'll get our bishop out, probably to e3 or f4, we'll get our knight out to f3, and then we can castle kingside. Alright, so here, once they play g6, their other option, we still drop our queen back to h4. Again, they're most likely to play knight to f6 once again. And now here, we'll reply with knight to c3. Once we reach this position, black has two main responses, either bishop to g7 or bishop to f5. Whichever move they play, it doesn't really matter, we'll still have the same response. So if they play bishop to f5, we'll push f3. This move attacks this pawn. More often than not, they will take. And once we recapture, we are down a pawn, but we still at least develop our knight in the process, and we are ahead at 2 pieces in development right now. Once they'll most likely play bishop to g7, we can push d3. What this move does is it sets up bishop to h6, which targets this fiend-kettoed bishop, which is going to be a very strong piece once this knight moves. So once they castle, we can go bishop to h6. Now this bishop is forced to be traded off because it's pinned to the rook. So, now if they play knight to d7, we can either castle queenside, or we can castle kingside. If we decide to castle queenside, we can now go for a nice pawn push. This will lead to a very aggressive game. It does also invite black to push on the queen side. So if you castle queenside, just know you'll be getting into a very aggressive game by both sides. So instead, if we try to castle kingside, this is a much safer option. We can work with a semi-open file rook. It can potentially be sacrificed for this knight to remove the defender on this pawn. So if we decide to castle kingside, we will end up going, if they play like knight to c5 or something, we will end up going knight to g5, and if they capture, we can get a rook out to a4. It will get in one way or another. We can even try and go for a pawn push if you like that. This bishop will eventually also be traded off. And we can move our knight into e4, attacking the only defender of this pawn. Because keep in mind, if this knight ever moves, and if this bishop is gone, this pawn is hanging. And if black allows you to get that pawn, that would be catastrophically bad for black, and their game would be pretty much over. Alright, so that is the accepted variation for white. Now black may decline the gambit and go like e6. Now, we reply with pawn to e5, and black will likely go c5, and no matter what they do here, we'll have a similar response. We can go pawn to c3, we can set pawn to d4 up once they go like knight to c6. we can then push pawn to d4. If they decide to capture on the d-pawn, this leads to a very easy game for us. We can go knight to f3, knight to c3, castle, and then like bishop to e3, and we are dealing with a very nice position while black is extremely cramped. So back here, if black decides to push, we can drop our bishop back to c2. And this is not a very good position for black. Sure, it's a little bit cramped for white, but this position is much better for white here. So if they decide to play like knight to e7 or something like that, we can then get our knight out to e2. The reason why I like e2 more is because you can maneuver it to g3 and then maneuver your b knight to d2 and then f3. So they decide to go like b5 or something, you can now maneuver this knight to d2 and then maneuver this knight to g3. So after this, you can also castle anytime. Sure, it takes a minute, but it's definitely better getting your knights to these two squares than one knight being on f3 and the other knight being stuck on d2. Once you reach this position, you can get your bishop out to either like e3 or f4. e3 is probably the better option. Of course, f4 hangs it. So from this position, you are doing really well. You have a nice space advantage. You have much better pieces, and you are doing very great here as white. So here, their other option is to go knight to f6. This move pretty much transposes. It's not as good. It's a good amount worse because they'll have a stuck knight on d7. Once we push e5, they'll fall back, and then we can just get a nice and easy d4 push in. If they decide to go c5, we can just go c3. And this pretty much directly transposes into the other line, except they have a really awkward knight on d7, so this position favors us even more. So now, their last option is to push e5. Now, this is not as common, and it's not as good, but still something to know what to do against. Here, there's a few options. I like to just take on d5, and then after they capture, we can go pawn to d4. Here, they will get a push in, and this does look kind of scary as they have a pretty big center, but we are going to have a lot of fun here. We are going to have a great time attacking this backwards pawn. This pawn for black is going to be very annoying to defend. If they ever go like knight f6 or something, we can always pin it with our bishop, and that's one of the defenders of this square completely gone. They'll go bishop to e6, most likely to defend this pawn, and then we can go knight to e2, and this allows us to maneuver our knight to f5. We can also always capture this knight too, removing a defender of the square, and then after like bishop to e7 or something, we can maneuver our knight to f4, and then we can castle, and here we have a ton of pressure on this pawn, and we are doing excellent here. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and I will see you next time.